news out of Colorado. We're going to stay with Christy Greenberg and Hugo Lowell to talk about it. The Colorado Supreme Court ruling that Donald Trump has now been disqualified from being on the primary ballot for the GOP.
Well, it is an interesting decision because the Colorado District Judge, Sarah Wallace, last month, when she made her decision, she had a really puzzling decision where she found, based on the evidence, that Trump had engaged in insurrection, but essentially said, well, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, it doesn't apply to presidents. He's not an officer such that it applies to him, which was a really odd result. So when that was appealed, I think a lot of people had been scratching their heads and thought the appeal was appropriate. And, you know, I haven't read the basis of this, but it sounds like at least the Colorado Supreme Court said no. Actually, if he engaged in insurrection, yes, he is an officer, and the 14th Amendment would apply to him. It would be a perverse result otherwise to have it apply to members of Congress and others in lower elected officials and not to the President of the United States.
I also want to bring in now former federal prosecutor and the host of the podcast Justice Matters, Glenn Kirshner. Glenn, again, I know that this is literally just coming across the wire right now, but I want to bring to our viewers' attention something that's on page 8 of this 200-page opinion. This is what the Colorado Supreme Court has held. 1, Section 3 that Christy was just talking about, Glenn, encompasses, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, let's be clear, encompasses the office of the presidency and someone who has taken an oath as president. On this point, the district court committed reversible error. And so it's cleared up that issue of how can you be the president of the United States and not be deemed to be an officer for purposes of your oath. In addition, Glenn, the district court did not err in concluding that the events at the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021 constituted a, quote, insurrection. The district court did not err in concluding that President Trump engaged in, and that's in quotes, that insurrection through his personal actions. And then President Trump's speech inciting the crowd that breached the U.S. Capitol on January 6 was not protected by the First Amendment. Glenn, we've been talking for days, if not weeks, about this idea of Donald Trump trying to hide behind the First Amendment to be able to give an excuse for what is otherwise going to be clear criminal conduct. Your thoughts about what this Supreme Court kind of ruling has now said as well?
You know, it's interesting, Katie, because all along it has felt like anybody with a basic understanding of the English language would read Section 3 of the 14th Amendment and conclude that Donald Trump is disqualified from serving in the event a court found that he engaged in insurrection. And what's really interesting now, getting down into the legal weeds a little bit, you know, the Colorado trial court found as a matter of fact, after a trial on the merits, a trial at which several witnesses testified, expert witnesses, witnesses who were at the Capitol that day, found as a matter of fact that Donald Trump engaged in an insurrection. And the reason that's so important as the case works its way through the appellate system now is factual findings like that are ordinarily given great deference in the appellate courts, because only the trial court judge gets to see the witnesses as they testify, assesses their demeanor, and reaches factual findings. So the fact that the trial court judge, in the estimation of the Colorado Supreme Court, got the legal conclusion wrong, and the Colorado Supreme Court basically reviewed that de novo from jump and reached a different conclusion, that's one thing. But the fact that we have these factual findings from a trial court should, frankly, continue to win the day up through the appellate court system, up to and including the Supreme Court. Because as long as those factual findings are supported by evidence of record, and they were, you know, this is going to be a real danger zone now moving forward for Donald Trump.
So, Hugo, I think we have Hugo still, right? Hugo, I want to read something to you that we also found here. It says, the sum of these parts is this. President Trump is disqualified from holding the office of president under Section 3. Because he's disqualified, it would be a wrongful act under the election code for the secretary to list him as a candidate on the presidential primary ballot. We do not reach these conclusions lightly. We are likewise mindful of our solemn duty to apply the law without fear or favor and without being swayed by public reaction to the decisions that the the law mandates we reach. I mean, Hugo, we talk about some of the major cases like in D.C., Mar-a-Lago, New York, et cetera, that seem to be kind of what Donald Trump is battling in terms of a legal front. But as we were talking about with Christy a few minutes ago and now with Glenn, there's these pockets of cases that are coming up, and they're intended and designed to ensure that we don't have another insurrection, another crazy second term with Donald Trump. Is this going to change the litigation calculus, the strategy calculus for Donald Trump now, considering this decision coming out of Colorado?
I think it necessarily changes the calculus. I can tell you with certainty, according to our sources, that Trump and his team did not anticipate ever getting removed from the ballot at all. And after the district court's decision in Colorado that kind of left him just off the hook, they thought that would be the end of the road. The Colorado issue was all over. And I'm speculating now, but I assume that the fact that the appeals court has ruled that Trump should be struck off the ballot will come as a surprise to them. I just texted someone at the campaign, and they've not responded to me yet about kind of what they are thinking. But this is something that has also been weighing on I think the lawyers' minds as well, because they have consistently called January 6th, this was a First Amendment thing, this was called political speech. This is an argument they have made in the D.C. federal case, is an argument they've made in their motion to dismiss in Georgia, and this was generally the argument they were settling on with respect to any questions about January 6th and what Trump said at the Ellipse rally. Of course, the D.C. District Court has also... As
we know it, your thoughts about the fact that now a Colorado Supreme Court has said that Donald Trump not only that there was an insurrection on 1/6, but that he engaged in that insurrection through his personal actions, and that his inciting of the crowd on that day is not protected First Amendment speech. We talk a lot about how Donald Trump elects to use words in speech in order to spur violence or to spur action by the people that follow him.
Yeah, I can't overestimate how important it is for the American people to see this kind of accountability coming down. And I've often said, thinking of what's happened to other autocrats, that some kind of ban would be ideal as a solution. In fact, Silvio Berlusconi, who left office with dozens of indictments, after he left for the final time, he was banned from running for office for 5 years. And this is what kind of deflated his personality cult. And Jair Bolsonaro, a former Brazilian president, is banned from politics or running for office until 2030. So this is something that's been done elsewhere, and I've been saying for some time that it would be something ideal in America, but I did not think that.
Coming out, voters are going to be voting throughout in primaries. This is a live issue. It is an issue where, unlike Trump in the other cases on the immunity issue, where he's made the argument haste makes waste and we should be deliberate and we should be careful and we should take our time, now you're going to see Trump saying the opposite, telling the Supreme Court, you've got to move fast because I need my name on the ballot for these primaries. So it's going to be interesting to see the tension between these cases and the different positions that he is taking about how fast to move.